Everybody, it's your main man, it's your ace boom coom, it's your guy. Hold on, and I like you, and ain't nothing you can do about it. Because you watching me here, Strong Inspirations. And let me tell you, I got a brother on the channel. I'm so excited that he has come on here. This guy here, let me tell you, he can't hear me, but he is an expert. He is known across America for what he does. He lives it, he teaches it. He's one of them celebrated, award-winning and all that kind of stuff professor at the big college, NYU, and he'll tell you all that too. But let me tell you, he got a unique topic, and you're gonna like it because you're getting it straight, no chaser, from the guy who knows. I'm Anthony Brogdon, and boy, I tell you, I have talked to him. Let me tell you how cool this guy is. I saw him online somewhere, and he was the main speaker. So I said, man, I got to try to hit this brother up, see if he come on strong. So I hit him up a little bit here and there, got through to him. My man sent me his cell number. He said, I want to be on your show. He sent me his cell number, and I said, dang. So I got to call him at the right time, be appropriate and everything like that. So I did. Sent him a text, called him. My man said, I want to do this. I've been watching your show. I see some of the videos you got on, and I want to be a part of that Strong Inspirations family. And let me tell you something. If I haven't, let me tell you, I'm Anthony Brogdon. I get a little crossed up right every now and then when I got people like this on my channel. This guy wrote that dissertation. And let me tell you, he wrote such a fine paper, they didn't even have to read it. They just said, boom, you in. He won them kind of cats. All right, smart, probably got all A's in grade school and things of that sort, but that's another story. So we jamming here, Strong Inspirations. Hit the subscribe button, because I'm giving it to you 4 or 5 videos a week. This thing is growing. Hit the like button on this video. Watch. My man got backdrop. Good looking guy. You're going to really like what he got to say. Boom. Hit the notifications bell for when the videos come up. You get a ding, a shock, a smoke signal, a horn blowing, or something to let you know that there's more new content to inspire you, my friend. And tell somebody about Strong Inspiration. Don't keep it to yourself. Don't be going out there in the streets and telling your boys and, hitting on some young lady or lady telling some guy, ooh, I know a lot of Black history, and don't tell them where you learn it. Don't do that. That's not right. So tell them about Strong Inspirations. I appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at A Strong Dream, because I post on there. My Instagram is A Strong 11. I got Facebook page, Strong Inspirations, Black History Then and Now, and then go to my website, businessintheblack.net. Did you see that video I did with the lady that said slavery in Mississippi was not taken off the books to 1993? I said, what? She said, yeah. They still, it wasn't, they probably found a way to do something to some Black folks in the back hills, because it wasn't illegal. Watch that video. It's on the channel. Did you see the one I just put up about Connecticut? They got a heritage trail. Connecticut was not a free state for a long time. They had slaves there. Watch that video, the Connecticut Heritage Trail. How about this one? I'm staying on Connecticut and this East Coast thing for a minute. Did you see the one I did? It was a white lady who had a school. Her name is Prudence Crandall. It was in Canterbury, Connecticut. So she was teaching all white students. So then a Black student slipped through the cracks, right? Got into school, was jamming, probably head of the class. You know how we do when we get them opportunities. And so the white people heard about the Black student. They telling the teacher, oh, you got to kick her out. We don't like our kid with Black kids, all this. This is 1840s. So she said, I tell you what, I'm not doing that. I'm kicking the white kids out of my school. She kicked the white kids out, and then the white people really went after her, and she only lasted 17 more months. Watch that video. I got 2 more for you. Watch the video I did with the guy who talked about this guy. His name is Philip Payton. In my man's town where he hangs out and teaches and all that other stuff, New York City, where Philip Payton is really the one guy who was in real estate that helped make Harlem a Black neighborhood. I kind of wondered how that went down because I like Harlem. When I go to New York, that's where I stay. Take me to Harlem. You know, I do my Times Square, but take me up there and let me eat in some of them restaurants and hang out in them people on the corners of 125th Street. That's what I do. All right. Watch that video. And then watch the video. I interviewed a guy who, real nice guy too. I've talked to him several times after. My man said that, and he white guy, check it out. He said, man, I found out Frederick Douglass, when he escaped, he landed in New York City. He said, man, ain't this something else? And he found out where he landed. He named the street after Frederick Douglass. It's called Frederick Douglass Landing. And I mean, he went through the protocol, the city government and stuff like that. And he got the bug so much, he named it and led the effort for 40 other streets and locations in New York City. Watch that video. I'm not playing with you, and this gentleman right here, he not gonna play with you today. He gonna feed you some good stuff. Watch out. Before I let him come on, two more things. Y'all know I got a movie out. It's called Business in the Black. I don't have the DVD with me, but trust me, it's good. Business in the Black, check it out. It's streaming on Amazon. And then I wrote this book. It's called Black Business Book. I really want you to get a copy. Something happened the last week. I had a lot of orders and I ship them out immediately. Get you a copy of my book. I signed it for you too, on how slaves learn how to read and write, and slaves who went to college, slaves who own businesses. It's all in here, and I name names. It's over 200 facts, very reasonably priced, because I want you to have it. I don't want it to be like, oh man, I ain't got that. You got this in your pocket. Get you a copy of my book, my friends. You'll enjoy that. Again, go to businessintheblack.net. Now, you hear me use this term strong a lot. That's the name of the show, Strong Inspirations. It's the word that I like the most. And strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that is my introduction to my guest today. He's a strong man. Watch him come on. He got a good shirt on him and everything. Come on, brother. Introduce yourself. Let's get it on. Thank you so much for being on my show.
Anthony, thank you for bringing me on. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Scott Alvin Barton. Right now I'm in Harlem where I live. As he said, I teach and research about food in the African diaspora, both here in the United States, historically, currently, and in northeastern Brazil, looking at the way food and faith merge within Afro-Brazilian communities. I do a variety of things from culinary education. I have an exhibition up right now that ends this weekend at Linden Sculpture Garden in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, all about funerary traditions, of food-based funerary traditions within our community to honor the murder and maiming of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Shaquille Taylor, George Perry Floyd Jr., and Jacob Blake Jr. It's got videos and a variety of things. If you go to Linden, L-Y-N-D-E-N Sculpture Garden, you'll find links. You can see a lot of the show even from your house if you're not in Milwaukee, but it'll be up until the 27th if you're in Milwaukee.
Okay, I love it. Okay, man, but before we get into some of the story of your expertise and stuff, I got to ask a couple questions about you, if you don't mind. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Norwalk, Connecticut, and raised there too. My parents integrated a community when I was about 3 months old. So we went from kind of the not inner city, the center of town. It's not a big, it was like 100,000, 150,000 person town, to a white community. And so my brother and I were the first Black kids in that community. And then one Black family moved in when I was about 5 or something like that, but they didn't stay a long time.
Yeah. Okay. So, let's stay on that just a tad. Did you have to fight? Did they pick on you?
They picked on both of us. He's older, so he got more of it than I did. Because when I started elementary school, was the year they started busing for racial integration. So technically, when I was in kindergarten, there were Black kids in my kindergarten class, but they were living on the other side of town. So it softened it for me, but he got beat up every day for the first few years of school.
Oh my God. Okay, hold on. How does this go? And if you might have saw that he told you he walking to school and they just kind of circle around him and then pick on him and then he gotta fight his way out just because he's Black.
Yeah, yeah, basically that was what it was. And he's a bigger guy than me. He was taller, broad shoulder. He played more sports. So he had something he could come back with. But still, if you got a gang of bullies and it goes from words to fists, not much you can do.
All right. How about this? Did that make how did that condition you to think towards white people?
It's complicated because I have to also say, obviously, I'm 3 months old, so I'm told about this later.
Yeah.
But white, particularly Jewish people, went to City Hall to fight for my parents to be able to buy in that community when they had discrimination against people. People discriminate against them to buy there. So on the one hand, I have people that I know. Some of them were in the NAACP in support of Blacks who were trying to fight for our equality, and then people who were trying to push us down. So it makes me have to keep my eyes and ears open all the time. Who really is my friend?
Yeah. Okay. So when you were there, did you? And I know you could only play with the white kids. Is that was your
Yeah,
compadres?
generally I did when I was really young. I would say this until about second or third grade, it was sort of mixed. But then the Black kids saw a difference between me and them. It's not that I wasn't wealthy. It wasn't like that. But we didn't have the same
Mm-hmm.
lifestyle. I guess the easy way to say it.
I got you.
So in the beginning of school, it worked. And then again, around fifth or sixth grade, it worked again. And when I went to junior high, it was more mixed. So there was a little bit easier, but there was also tension because in junior high, some of the Black kids were jealous. So sometimes they would pick on me. So it could come from either side. By high school, it worked out and I found a place in both worlds. And in college, I continued that way until now, that now I have a comfort in any world I can enter, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, how about this one? I like where you're coming from. We're gonna get to the topic, but this is good stuff for everybody to hear this. I was someplace and a guy he came at me and he said, the first thing a Black person does when they get a money is they move out of the neighborhood. Um, and I looked at him and I was like, so what does that mean to you? And I was trying to get to where he was getting at because, and I'm gonna have your take on this, because if I got the money and I want to move into a better house,
Mm-hmm.
and we're gonna even go with this, a safer neighborhood, then I should be able to, but that does not lessen my Blackness. What's your take on that?
I guess the question, the core question, no, I don't think it has to compromise your Black identity unless or until you try to forget what you look like in the mirror
I got you.
and mirror who you're not to try to fit in to who they are that you aren't.
I got you. I love it. Let me go from that to this, and I'm going a little deeper on you just in this regard. Do you know how do you know the plantation in your family? And then how they got to Connecticut and that kind of thing?
So I mean, I'm a split decision from my understanding of the age of era of my parents. My mother's people go back to Madeira in Portugal, St. Kitts and Barbados, and then emigrate to New York City in the teens of the last century. My father's people, his dad comes from Columbia, Tennessee, and that's the closest I could say to a plantation, other than my mother's great grandmother in Portugal, which sounds like she was in a plantation like setting. And
Yeah.
my dad's mother was really from the East Coast, and I had always been told that she was a free Black, that which I don't know that that could be. And
Yeah.
the little bit I've been able to trace her people, they go from Massachusetts for generations to Philly and Maryland. But even though I found 18th century relatives, I haven't found enough information to see. I'm guessing by the time we're in Maryland in the 1800s, those people are enslaved, but I can't get enough information on them.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And what was the attraction to Connecticut? What was the industry that Black people could work in industry
Oh,
back them days?
one thing before I forget, my name, Scott Barton, my base name, it's English and Scottish. And the surname is the name of the family that owned my dad's ancestors in Tennessee. So I do know that. But to get into Connecticut, my mother, like I said, was a New York City native. My dad had gone to FAMU in Tallahassee. He got
Yeah.
a scholarship, and then he had a really unique existence. He was really smart and kind of against what you would think. The teachers in his school in Massachusetts in grade school put him with the white kids because he was excellent in his grades, which wasn't typical. And so it gave him a leg up, and he got a scholarship in sports, and he went down south, and he didn't do well. Even though he went summers to Tennessee for his part of his youth, he didn't, by his word, he didn't understand how to handle a segregated environment, and he had to leave Florida. He said he could have died because he would say the wrong things to the wrong people.
Oh, really?
And so he realized that he wouldn't be safe there. So he comes to New York, he gets a trade, he does well, he meets my mother, he wants to finish college, he gets a scholarship to Connecticut, to I think it's Northeastern Connecticut State in New Britain, and he wants to be a doctor. And he arrives to go to school, and they say, we'll give you the scholarship, but not to be a doctor, because that could mean you might have to doctor white people. So they said,
Really? Oh my God.
we'll give you a scholarship to be a teacher, which is, he didn't want to do that. But he ended up becoming a teacher. They end up both becoming teachers. She had been a dietitian because she had wanted to be a chef. And it really wasn't possible or probable for a Black woman or a woman to be a chef. So she could be a dietitian as her first career. They both end up becoming teachers, and he becomes a school administrator. He was a speech pathologist, and she taught special ed, the most severe disabilities and special needs of the youngest kids from 3 years, 9 months to 7 years of age. He ended up being assistant superintendent of a school system for most of my teen years.
Let me ask you this. The Black people, when they moved to Connecticut, what was the jobs that was available for them? Welding or something like that? Do you remember?
Oh,
Was there an industry or something?
historically, yeah, there would be fishing. Just like in New York City, there were a lot of oystermen were Black.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and just like you see that in the Chesapeake Bay, a lot of the oystermen were
Yeah.
Black. My town was for Connecticut a key port, and going back to the early 19th century. So there were, in the Industrial Revolution, there were early factories there. So there would have been factory work, and you can see close to where in what's called South Norwalk, where the port would have been. It ends up, by the time I'm a preteen, there's a lot of projects, urban development, and kind of ghetto communities that came out of areas that had factories. Some of the factories still existed. And my dad actually was the head of a development center called the Redevelopment Center that was meant to try to provide better housing, jobs, and education opportunity for Blacks. in that part of town, in the town in general, but that was where the place that needed it most. So, I would say historically it was, manual labor, factory work, some
Yeah,
fishing
sure.
industry. Um, my my dad's dad had before there was Metro North, the railroad that takes you to whether upstate New York or Connecticut. There was a boat that was called the Fall River Line that
Really?
went. I think it went all the way from Maine, but at least from Boston down to New York and to DC, and I think there were lines that went to Florida. But he operated between Massachusetts and I think DC, and my dad's dad was very, very light skinned.
Okay.
And as you know, and especially if you look at the history of food service workers in the White House, they were picked for a certain height and a certain skin color.
Really?
Brown men couldn't get those jobs, and not too tall either. They didn't want them to stand out. They wanted to be visually noticed. And so my grandfather was very fair skinned. He looked very black, but very, very pale. So he became the head maitre d' of the ship. And this was when it was only for upper middle class or upper class whites.
Yeah.
Before they had a railroad, but it was the railroad company co-owned it, who had railroads in other parts of the Northeast, which
Yeah.
allowed him to, in the summer, he could have a passage round trip for his family to go anywhere the railroad went. So that's how come my father and his sister and his mother would go to Tennessee for part of the summer to be with my grandfather's family as
Oh,
a benefit. But like
yeah.
my father, when he was 17, getting out of high school, and his dad, who didn't have a lot of formal education, got him at least a summer job on the boat. And, it was what my grandfather knew, and he could make a living out of it. And he was, real absentee. They had a very tight marriage, but he was on the boats a lot.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
father worked his last summer of high school with his father, and the majority of the laborers were Black, and the majority of them, I interviewed my dad about a decade before he passed, about the majority of the laborers, whatever, cooks, manual laborers, waiters, maitre d's, were Black men, and most of them were educated, had high school and college degrees, but they couldn't get work.
Yeah.
And my father, again, not being raised in, probably had his father been more present and not had a job that kept him on the
Yeah.
road, my father didn't see that as a direction to go towards. And the men he met working with my dad were very unhappy because they
Yeah.
couldn't use the knowledge they had gained. So
Yeah.
they also encouraged him not to do that work. They said, you can
Yes.
get work, you can do this, but it will eat you up. And
Yeah.
that sent him to college.
I love it. So let me ask you this: where is your love for Black history and to do what you do? What triggered that, and how did you find this niche to do what you do?
I always say, and I still say, that my mother is the strongest influence, but both of them had a handle.
Yeah.
Two things that are very important to me, or three. When I was, as I said, my mother wanted to be a chef. And so she raised my brother and I to do, in addition to whatever you would imagine as chores for young boys, we had to do what we historically call women's work. So we learned to sew, to cook, to clean, because she wanted us to be independent.
Yeah, I love it.
What happened, if we got married or we're single guys,
Yeah.
and also not to give independence to the woman, assuming we married and had a wife
Yeah.
and kids, that she wasn't having to wait on us, whoever that
Yes, I
woman would
love
be.
it. Yeah.
And so that's one thing. And so in doing it, her having wanted to be a chef, she didn't just teach us about her food and our dad's food is New England and Southern and West Indian food. She wanted us, since the way we grew up in this mixed community, to learn about people through their food. So she would make us meals that were Irish or
Oh,
Germany,
really? I
whatever.
love
So
it.
we say that this is what those people eat. So we
Yeah.
would learn. And if our grandmothers came, they would make their food. So dad's mom would be kind of New England and my mom's mom would be from Barbados. So we would learn that. So it started me thinking about people and their culture around food. And I was a chef for 30 years before I went back to school to get a PhD. So that's one thing.
Yeah, I
Two
love
things
it.
really important in my youth. There's a woman I'm still in touch with named Bonnie Claire Smith, who was a youth leader in her church in Birmingham, Alabama, the 16th Street Baptist Church that we all know.
Yep, yep.
She was part of an exchange program that was partially administered by the Quakers and I think the NAACP to bring bright young Black students into the homes of white Quaker families as an idea of racial reconciliation in the civil rights movement. So she came to our community, to people that my parents knew because of the NAACP membership who were white Quakers, and she lived with them and happened to arrive in August of 1963. So she wasn't in the church when it was bombed. She should have been with the four little girls, two of the
Wow.
her best friend. So as the youth leader or the leader of the youth faction of the church, she should have been exactly where those girls were.
Yeah.
So that engagement, this was my first babysitter. That
Yeah.
gave a direct link to civil rights. My parents, before I was in kindergarten, we were every week going to civil rights demonstrations for voting rights, etc.
Oh, really?
Our town, for the Woolworths boycott, etc. And then the other thing, a year later, 1964, they participated in, and I'm trying to find the roots of this. They were one of about 30 or 40 families in the tri-state New York area that brought in, I think it's UNESCO, and I thought it was the State Department, but I haven't gotten a link. But
Sure.
they had about 30 or 40 men who were very bright and had already gone through education system in Nigeria and Ghana, and they matched them with Black families in the United States in the Northeast, and then paid for them to go to college so that while they were in school, they had a Black connection.
Okay.
So we had this Igbo guy named Vincent Okuchukwu Ike who went to Holy Cross. So as a 5 or 6 year old, so I was about 10 or 11, I had a Nigerian brother.
I love it.
And so that gave me a sense of the Black world, what we now call the African diaspora.
Yes.
A few years ago, after both my parents passed, I found him again. He's now a research scientist in Nigeria.
Oh.
I'm guessing he's probably in his high 70s now.
Yeah, sure. Let me
So
ask you this. Okay, go back again. You study what you said earlier, and what does that mean?
I have a degree in food studies with an anthropological focus. And so I study the production, consumption, celebration, and distribution of food. And in my part of it, I do it with an African diaspora focus. And most specifically, I was interested initially in the influences in US Southern food. And I started to look at the transatlantic slave trade and the foods that we call transfer foods like okra and black-eyed peas and true yams, etc.
Oh, let me stop you there. You call them transfer foods because they started out in Africa and then came to America.
And they came from there either by the act of the slaves or the enslavers realizing that some of those foods had value. It goes both ways because, for example, the Portuguese brought corn from the Americas to Africa because it grew faster and they could preserve it for the slave voyages better than millet and some of the things they had been using previously that would either be hard to maintain or would rot.
Okay, let me stay on that. I like that. What you're saying now is when they were on the voyages, they had food for the slaves and slaves.
Meager, but yes. And it was for the sailors and the slaves. And obviously the sailors got more. The slaves got very little. One of the things that uh, is commonly seen is, I'm trying to think of what you call it. It would be like a slop bowl that has something like grits in it or fufu, something like this, a grain, a pounded grain, and with something called palaver sauce. It usually had migrated peppers or the grain of paradise pepper, which is sort of like the Sichuan pepper, not a little stronger than black pepper, palm oil, maybe chili pepper. Very rarely would it have meat. Maybe it had some dried meat or smoked meat, a little bit just for flavor, but some kind of gruel with this sauce, a flavorful sauce. That would be what the slaves got. The sailors might have gotten some dried fish or meat, and they might have had a similar base, but they needed to have something, because if you're going to have 30 to 60 days, depending on the trade winds, you need to feed them something. So they were growing some stocks close to the slave ports before the boats would set out. So there was something that was usually dried, like cornmeal, as opposed to fresh corn on the cob, for example. To a certain degree, yams. But the yams at one point, as you can tell in your own house, they'll get mealy or they'll rot. So you either have to dry it or grind it, somehow preserve it relative to the tropical heat.
Now, did how often would they feed the slaves? And I mean, this is a crazy question. Would they feed them every day, or what do you think that might have
That's
been?
hard. I think most likely maybe once a day at best. As we know, for most, unless some of the women at times could be on top of the ship, which on the decks of the ship, but that also might be that they're being sequestered by the males for sexual pleasure.
Yeah.
But we know that the majority of the slaves and mostly all of the men are in those holes where we're, head to foot together, and we're stacked, and we're in our own excrement and our own vomit and our own urine. And so generally speaking, we were severely underfed. And when we would get fed of more substance is close to or at arrival of port. We were then washed, we were shaved. Typically they would shave all your body hair because as you can see, if we have gray hair coming in and I shave my pubic hair, my underarm hair, my hair, my head, you don't know quite how old I am.
Okay.
And they would shine us up, often with palm oil or other oil, so that we glistened in the sun. So we looked like anybody, like polishing your silver. So we looked more presentable at market. They would do, depending on where and how you were sold, you might be quote unquote mended, given a little bit something with more substance so that you looked a little bit more fortified. Because if you sell something that looks like it's going to die tomorrow, you're not going to get that much out of it.
Let me go back to the foods again. What was and you might know, was there some nourishment in the foods that they gave them though? If you look back on it, do people eat those foods today, and there is some nourishing value in those foods?
Well, yeah. So think about it. Oversimplified, carbohydrates, especially if they're complex carbohydrates, I'm saying not white rice, not pasta, not instant oatmeal, give you natural sugars and a quick burst of energy. Very simply, right? So if I'm giving you boiled yams or something that looks like grits or polenta, or something that looks like or feels like fungi or fufu, then I'm filling your belly up. I'm giving you a little bit of natural sugar in the grain that will give you some energy. And this is the thing, is the fat that could be from the palm oil, if you had a little bit of animal protein that could be from dried fish, jerk beef, or dried beef, not much, very little. There might be a little bit of nutrition. The chili pepper, depending on how spicy, has some vitamin C and would give you some protection against some basic illnesses because of the nature of, and especially for people who already were ingesting spicy foods. You know that if you are somebody who doesn't eat spicy foods and go to Mexico or Southeast Asia and it's very spicy, it irritates your heart.
Okay.
But if you are somebody culturally who has been eating chili peppers, it is a cleanser to your heart and blood, and it's a fortification. But you're really, I don't know that they had the, so to speak, technology we have today to give you a measured meal that would precisely give you just barely enough to live. But in essence, that's what they were doing. Whether they had the technology to understand exactly.
Okay.
So
Let me ask you this question. The slaves came from all parts of Africa. Was
Yes.
there some parts that because of the diet, the person was more healthier than others?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't know an easy answer to that. The one thing that is now becoming more important in looking at the history is in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of the people have been influenced by Muslim culture, which gave them literacy because they had to read the Quran. And that might give them some knowledge, or if this wouldn't be the 16th century or 17th, but maybe the late 17th or 18th, if products were labeled in sacks with some kind of writing, they might know what it was. And you realize that, we don't like this history, but in many ways, Africans sold Africans to make money. And if you were the son of a king, if they captured you, that was a coup. So in some cases, you do have histories of elite Africans being sold into slavery. So they would have known how to eat well, and they would have had a very good diet. To know the proportions, now that there's all this genealogical work, I guess over time we'll be able to look at that. If we can, if you look at that, what is it? Henry Gates has that show on PBS where he traces the fruits, or people do the genealogy websites. If you could start to drill it down to understand really who you come from, not just like, I know that I have a lot of West African heritage in my DNA, but I haven't, the way you see on those shows, they can really pinpoint somebody. Yes, if they can get to that point with more or most of us, we might be able to separate who came from an elite background that might have had a better diet.
Yeah, I got you. Let me ask you this: what about, is there and you talk about the foods from the different, is rice healthy? Is and some of the other grains, are those healthy for people? From those, I don't know the names, but like, and if you could pick one, what was the most healthy item that you could eat from that point?
Speaking, yes, rice is healthy, and we have to remember that the trade along the Silk Road that goes through China into Turkey and up through Europe, part of the settler colonial desire was to upset the monopolies that the Asians had and to create business that would be in competition. And one of the key businesses of commodities I'm talking about is rice.
Right.
And broadly speaking, yes, rice is healthy. And we see this in China when the Dutch go there, because the Dutch, in refining rice and shucking or hulling the outer layer, think of whole wheat flour as opposed to white flour, or in this case, brown rice as opposed to white rice. They lose a lot of the vitamin and mineral content, and you start to have diseases in Chinese culture that they didn't have before this refining of the rice.
Okay.
So similarly, most rice has a husk that gives you more fiber, more complex, makes it a much more complex carbohydrate, and slows down the way your body processes it and takes the sugar and turns it into insulin. And so you get a measured slow dose of sugar and energy. Whereas when you have totally stripped white rice, and if you have that instant minute rice, you're really getting very little nutrition. You're getting a good you're getting a solid amount of fiber, but it's not a complex carbohydrate. So it goes through your system quickly. It could lead you, if you eat it in large quantities, to be predisposed to be
I got
pre-diabetic.
you. I got you.
But, and it also relates to the proportion you're having. We think of uh, meals where there's a complement. So the classic one is rice and beans, and that gives you a quote unquote perfect protein.
Okay.
We also know the Native Americans, particularly Iroquois, had corn, beans, and squash doing the same thing. The Africans, it was black-eyed peas, yams, and okra did the same thing.
Okay.
If rice is added, it's great, but you go to a lot of these takeout places, no matter what the ethnic group, they'll give you a big old amount of rice because they want to
Yeah.
fill you up. And we really should look at the proportion of that as opposed to if it's served with beans or protein
I
fish.
got you. I got you.
So
Let me ask you this. What about and you also alluded to this in your research, when you go down to Brazil and some of those type of spots, are there where does fruits play into this diet? The bananas, plantains,
that's what you
so on and
asked.
so forth.
In the current state we're living, one of the most common carbohydrates eaten around the globe are bananas. And as
Really?
you know, there's many varieties, hundreds of varieties of bananas, and some, as you nicely mentioned, bananas and plantains. For most of us, plantains have to be cooked. They're not eaten raw the
Yeah.
way we eat a banana.
Right.
And they're not bad complex carbohydrates, and they have a certain degree of sugar. We know with plantains, or we see it very directly with plantains, and especially in Spanish speaking or Caribbean cultures of any language group, that you can eat a green plantain and it's very starchy, or you let it get black and it's very sweet like candy.
Yeah.
And so the way that your body processes it will be different. You get some value in terms of minerals. Potassium is one of the things you get out of bananas.
Yeah.
And other fruits, because we know in the tropics there's a lot of fruits that are consumed. You get a lot of the water soluble vitamins like vitamin C. But again, the question is how fibrous, like mangoes have got a lot of fiber. So as opposed to like a strawberry or something like this.
Yeah.
And so what are we eating in combination? It's always
I
about
see.
combination.
When we talk about bringing those foods to America from Africa, and let's use this as one example, the Gullah Geechee culture. They have a certain food item that they eat more than others, and so on and so forth. What would that be that they might have brought to Africa from Africa, specifically compared to somebody who was Black and maybe wasn't African? I don't know what that question is, but is there
That's a
something
good
there?
question. So one of the things you see, uh, the Gullah Geechee, if somebody doesn't know, inhabit what is commonly called the Low Country in the southeastern United States.
Right.
And when I say Low Country, I mean the southernmost coastal portion of North Carolina through the coastal portions of South Carolina and Georgia to the northernmost coastal portion of Florida.
Right.
The barrier islands and some part of the initial landmass, we think of Charleston and Savannah as the big cities, so to speak, in that area. One of the classic things you see popularized in the late 20th century by the famed chef Edna Lewis is bene seed, a type of sesame seed that has a very distinct flavor and texture and is used in sweet and savory applications and has an essential oil that is good for your hair, teeth, bones, etc.
Right.
Again, okra is common. In that area, there's a lot of fish and shellfish, so that if they had been coastal, you have to remember that a lot of the enslaved were not necessarily coastal. They learned about the ocean. If we follow the religious traditions, they end up making a risha or deity upon arriving at the ocean that has to be the person who has the domain of the sea, because they may have, if they've been inland, only known about rivers and waterfalls, and so only had deities for fresh water. The other key things that I would ascribe to all of the, if you're in the Low Country, most people in this country, whether they're black or white, who like Southern food, are familiar with black-eyed peas. But there are many varieties in the Low Country, lady peas, crowder peas, etc., that are all these pea beans that generally cook quicker than, let's say, a kidney bean or a black bean, that really come out of the African experience. The rice that I mentioned, the Europeans, in trying to fight this, the commodity culture in the Silk Road, imported Africans from Senegambia, from southeastern Senegal near the Gambian border, or Sierra Leone, which are really some of the strongest antecedents. We look at DNA and genealogy of the Gullah Geechee, because they knew how to farm rice. And the Europeans, other than accept the regions in Valencia where we get the bomba rice for paella, in the northern parts of Italy where we get the Valenino, or the arborio rice you think of, or risotto, or in the Camargue where you have a similar rice, all of these glutinous rices in France. But the regular rice that you associate as a fluffy individual grain, they really didn't have that culture. So the Africans taught the Europeans. They cultivated Africans to bring that knowledge to teach them. The Africans also intercropped their rice with raising cattle. So the cattle dung would fertilize the ground that was stripped from the rice. So our earliest cowboy culture come from these same people.
I love it.
They're getting exported throughout the Americas, and we see it in Mexico as well as the American West.
Let me ask you this question, and then we, almost kind of come to a little close here, so to speak, timing. What about the bad foods that they fed the slaves, enslaves? Well, I'm talking, and I shouldn't have said bad, but for a lack of a better word, I'm talking about the pig feeds, the chitlins, all those kind of things. That what they call the scraps. Is there any nourishing value in any of those, and which ones are? What's the take on them? How do we get to eat them? Because
that's a very interesting and complex question, but I can give you a quick answer. On the one hand, go back to the fact that I said that a lot of people, we now know more and more that there's a certain percentage of Muslims. So some people voluntarily refuse to eat because a Muslim will not eat pork.
Right.
So that becomes an issue. And you have records of people who will starve themselves or refuse to eat it. But we know that the European cultures, broadly speaking, the way the Italians like anchovies or garlic to flavor, that salt pork or bacon was a flavoring, if not, in fact, a whole side of pork or pork chops as a main dish. So slaves who may have been exposed to Muslim culture had to rectify or relinquish food in general, but generally rectify a relationship to pork in their diet. When you say pig's feet, there's a lot of collagen, and it's actually good for your bones and nails because of the gelatin that is in pig's feet. Chitlins, I can't speak. I know it's something we ate. I can't speak of the nutritional value, but if you're given, this what we now call nose to tail cooking, from the the rooter to the tutor, as they say, the head meat would actually be very good for you because, again, it's got a lot of gelatin, so it would be fortifying to your system. We wouldn't get what we call prime cuts. Now the question comes up, and this is a big issue. If we look at slave diets, a peck of meal, a piece of salt pork, if they have the ability for a slave garden, whatever they can grow if they have time and energy and seeds or what have you. So to a certain degree, some people were able to fortify whatever meager rations they were given. But the key, I think, is there's an imbalance relative to how some of us eat from memory of, let's say, a Southern diet, where if we're working somewhere between 12 and 18 hours a day in hard labor, we need a high caloric count. I'm sitting in a chair at a computer. If you give me that diet, it's going to destroy me.
Okay.
it could, and if you look at like Olympic athletes, when they're competing, they may eat thousands of pounds, excuse me, thousands of units of calorie to be able to perform on that level, but only when they're at competition level. So when we think about those diets that have maybe a lot of fat in them or fatty meats, we may be able to rationalize an aspect of that relative to the forced labor that was going on. But then when we adapt a diet that has more a sedentary quality, like most of us do today, most of us are not working back-breaking jobs.
Yeah, sure.
You need to think about, how do I mix it? How do I add vegetables? Also the misnomer we see in a lot of our restaurants, the Depression era meat in 3 cafeteria meal, where you picked a meat and got macaroni and cheese or collard greens or black eyed peas or whatever, that still pervades the South. It in itself is not a bad way to eat. I'm not trying to discriminate it, but what we lose sight of is that the slave diet was really the original farm to table. It had a lot of vegetables in it. We didn't have a lot of meat. It was much closer to the Asian diet, where meat is sort of a condiment.
I
And
love
so,
it.
so there's a lot more health than we ascribe. But what we end up enjoying are the things that are very flavorful. If we have the money, the way you talked about moving to a new neighborhood, you'll get a slab of ribs, and you might have oxtails and ribs, and get your cornbread and get your macaroni and cheese. So then suddenly it's like, we don't need that much protein. We don't need that much carbohydrate.
Okay.
Can we add string beans? Can we add collard greens? Whatever those other things. If you're going to eat that kind of traditional menu, then how much can I mix it up so I have a better measurement or proportion of animal protein or fish or poultry to more complex carbohydrate. If it's all about biscuits, I love biscuits. I eat biscuits, but I eat a lot of them because it's really refined flour.
Yeah. Well, 2 more questions. What about where did in enslavement, where did chicken and beef come in? Were they allowed to eat those? Were chicken growing wild? And
That's a very good question. So a guy named Alfred Crosby in the late 60s, early 70s, this is a generalization. Historians previously had been looking at what the pharaoh ate or the king ate. And in the 60s and mid to late 60s and 70s, this reflexive turn happened in a lot of research to say, not only what did the rich man eat, but what did the poor man eat? And out of it, one of the historians, it's a couple that are important, Eugene Fox Genovese, who famous book, Roll, Jordan Roll, tells us about slave diets and slave life. But the one I'm thinking about is Alfred Crosby in his famous book, The Columbian Exchange. And he looked a different side of what we call the triangle trade that we all know about, where slaves are traded for products instead of money. So there's no money changing hands, all barter. He's looking at what are the other things that come out of the importation of slaves. And he identifies that there are food that are ingredients, products that are coming out of Europe, Africa, or the Americas, a little bit of Asia, and being brought to each respective place. There's diseases, syphilis, smallpox, gonorrhea. There are ideas, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, that teach the Haitians that they could see themselves as people and revolt because if they're people, they have the right to freedom. The separation of government. We know that Ben Franklin, like the councils, the elder councils of the Native Americans, and copied our 3 parts of government on Native American tradition. But in terms of the food, when I said transfer foods, we know these foods that come out of Africa. What comes out of Europe, all of our livestock, chicken, goat, sheep, cattle, horses, come to the Americas. So the pre-Columbian diet, you would have had fish, lizard, some ducks, deer, insects. That's what most people would have eaten who were native, or the earliest Europeans having to adapt until they were able to bring things. And so we can look also, going back one more time to Edna Lewis. In her time, she grew up in what was called Freetown, Virginia, the child of, I think she's the child of people who had been enslaved. That she only had fried chicken in the spring when it was a young chicken and it was sweet. And if you ever had baby chicken fried, it's very sweet, like you had sugar in it. And we know, and I this winter living in Indiana on a research fellowship, they would sell me stew chickens, they would call them. They never get tender. You could make soup with them. That's like, they'll call them stew or soup chickens. You can't really eat the meat. It's just stringy. It's been walking around for too long. But you can get some of the protein and the broth and the fortification that way. So the young chicken or baby chicken might give you a fried chicken, but that all becomes new to the equation. What we do know in terms of food and the Africans is, as I said earlier, certain foods that are ingredients like okra, black-eyed peas, bene seed, true yams. There are many more than those, but those are a watermelon, the things we most commonly associate. Right. Ways of cooking, frying in deep oil, what you now call deep fat frying, right. Soupy stews, so that you have, for the average person, the way you have mashed potatoes and gravy, but instead of mashed potatoes, it would be fufu made from plantain and yams, or plantains or corn, and right. Then gravy that's got a little bit of meat flavor or some kind of smoked and dried fish flavor. Think about collard greens. Collard greens are from Northern Europe. The way you cook them, that's the African part. So they use what the Europeans were importing for themselves. We don't want to cook it the way they do it, but we're going to make it our way, yes. Like we would have in Africa. I
love it. I guess and this is a general question. Is there a question that I have not asked you? I know we've covered a lot. That when you talk to people, this is your ha-ha comment to them that blows their mind. Is there? I don't want not to have one of those. There's something.
One of the things I would say that came out of the first week, I spent a lot of time over the last decade, 12, 13 years, in northeastern Brazil doing research that came out of being on the board of the Southern Foodways Alliance out of Oxford, Mississippi for several years, and discussions and debates we had about who influenced U.S. Southern cooking that we know. And yes, generally people said Africans, indigenous, and Europeans, and predominantly 4 different European nations. But some people at that time didn't want to give a lot of responsibility to African contributions, and that became the debate. When I went to Brazil, and I was thinking when I first got there, what's the deal with okra? Because most people have to learn to like okra. It's not like a tomato.
I agree with that.
You might like it pickled, you might like it fried, but if you eat it in the South and it's slimy for some,
right?
They make it even slimier in Brazil because they like it in a different way. But I said, why okra? Is there another thing I'm not seeing? And the first week I got there, I had my first popcorn bath given by people who follow traditional or hybridized African religions in northeastern Brazil. And I saw by them popping popcorn without any fat, without any salt, mixing it with shaved fresh coconut, and then rubbing 2 Afro-Brazilian priests or priestesses would rub it in your face, your head, your shoulders, your back, your legs, really? Throw it away, pray over you, and then lightly beat you with medicinal herbs to cleanse your aura, cleanse in their mind, the possibility for infectious disease, and bless you within the structure of gods and goddesses they had coming out of West African tradition. Yeah. And then I saw, a lot of these foods that we eat or ingredients we make dishes from, like okra, are both sacred and secular. Something like hoppinjon that some people eat white and black in the South for good luck at on New Year's Day, are ingredients that are also used to honor deities like Ogun and Oshun that make change happen, that help for fertility, that open a path for the next step you're going to make. So that when you start to see that we came here, maybe nothing, maybe in a loincloth, maybe naked, but we had knowledge that came with us, that we often from generations and decades and centuries were not given the credibility that we had our own native intelligence. But if you understand the knowledge that came with the Africans, that is both kind of book smart, spiritual, living off the land, a lot of the foods we eat have a sacred aspect.
I love it.
We may eat it and have it as a family meal, but for some people who follow the history, that also gives you a blessing.
I love it. Everybody, what did I tell you about this guy here? What did I tell you? What did I? Expert, undoubtedly, on strong inspirations, where we give it to you straight, no chaser from all angles.
Thank you.
Watch this video. Listen to this guy. Now, hold on. One more thing. Do you have a book out or something like that? How do people find out about you? And
I'm working on a book right now. You know, I
Okay.
said in the beginning, I did this project because of all the Black Death that we're seeing, from Buffalo to Patrick Leoya in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Yeah.
Many people. And so I just did this 2-year project to honor these people, at least spiritually, metaphorically. I researched food they like to eat or cook and made that for them and gave it to some of my elders in Harlem. And so I have a book project. I'm working on that.
Okay.
That will be out hopefully in about a year or so.
Okay.
I have essays. If you know, a beautiful thing you might see is Bryant Terry, the vegan chef, has a book that came out that's won a bunch of awards called Black Food Stories, Art and Recipes from Across the African Diaspora. I have, I was one of the people who helped coordinate finding people to be in that book, both African, African-American, Caribbean, etc. And I have an essay about grace.
Okay. Do you have a website? Is it anything like that?
I'm building a website now.
Okay, cool. I got you.
Making videos.
I got you.
I will send you something as soon as I can that you can share.
Yeah. I got you. Everybody, this is what we do. Hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspirations. Hit the like button on this video. Hit the notifications bell, tell somebody about us. And to you, my brother, I say this, and I mean this with all sincerity. I really mean this one. I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love what you're doing, educating people and letting us know that it's all right. And that there's value in everything as we get this nutrition in us to make us be better people. How about that?
Right on.
Better people. Thank you so very much for coming on the show. I'll be in touch. Everybody, bye-bye. We out.
Peace. Thank you. Peace.